It's interesting how over recent years, how the rainbow has become adopted as a symbol by different groups and organizations. We might think of the LGBTQ plus movement, and within the rainbow that they use each of the colors representing such things as life, healing, sunlight, nature, harmony, spirit, and with the whole then representing diversity. You remember we also saw it during those dark days of lockdown as a symbol of hope. And we see more and more organizations encouraging staff to wear a rainbow badge to indicate that the person is approachable and compassionate. It's interesting how today so many groups and organizations claim this symbol of hope, of openness and promise, and yet how they appear to forget that this is a symbol that was God's idea as both a promise and as a reminder. And it's here in Genesis that we first encounter this amazing symbol. But we might ask, why does this symbol appear here in our set of readings for this first Sunday in Lent? And what, if anything, does it say to us today? So often, I think, when we hear this story of Noah and the flood, we can tend to interpret or understand it in two main ways. Firstly, we can often sanitize it completely and see it simply as a cute story for children, full of animals and houseboats, and the rainbow as some sort of all-clear signal. Or we can go completely the other way and see this story as portraying a vengeful God who despises what he's made, and in a mindless act of sheer anger and frustration decides to wipe the slate clean and start again, with all that God had called very good now being seen as broken beyond repair. And yet, if we see this story of the flood in those two ways, then I'd like to suggest that we sort of miss the point. We miss what the Bible is trying to communicate to us. Because as we dwell with the story, we start to see and sense something more of its depth and its complexity. So how should we understand this story today, particularly within the context of our Lenten journey? Well, to do this, I think we need to sort of widen our scope just a little. And if we step back to Genesis chapter 6, and what we would see there is the state of humanity. In fact, we would see the state of creation, with its focus upon self, no thought for God, the human heart having become corrupt, controlling, self-seeking. And we might say the work of Satan from chapter 3 in Genesis was now fully complete, where we see how God had become but a trampled byword in the pursuit of self, and where God's creation almost appears to have turned against him, no longer acknowledging God at all. And we might say, doesn't that reflect a little bit of society today? And we see God's heart is broken, filled with pain. God is grieved. He's hurt. He's saddened. Not so much being sorry for what he created, but sorry that what he created has chosen to turn away, chosen to turn its back on its creator and put itself in the driving seat. And if we listen carefully, we hear God's heart break. how can what was very good so quickly have hit the self-destruct button? But all is not lost. God sees Noah and his family, and they see God. Now, at this point, we need to be very careful that we don't start to see or understand Noah and his family as being in some way perfect, better than everyone else. They certainly were not super pious, super religious people who never got anything wrong. We only need to look to the end of chapter 9 to see that. We only need to look back to chapter 8 to see that God knows that the inclination of the human heart will always now, as a result of the fall, will always tend to err towards self and away from God. So what has changed? And as we consider that question, I think this is where we start to encounter something of the complexity and the depth of what we see going on in the narrative here. For at risk of being burned at the stake, I would like to suggest that what we see in this is a change in the heart of God. For what we glimpse now at this point is that God's love, his grace, his blessing now become unconditional. God offers his hand, but now and from this point on, never forces us in any way whatsoever to take it. The choice is ours. We might argue that prior to this point of Noah and the flood, God's plan and purpose for his creation, we might dare to say was in some way conditional. Adam and Eve enjoy the benefits of the garden, the presence of God with them, but God says, don't eat that. We see Cain and Abel both offering sacrifices to God, but God says Abel's is better. But here, with Noah, who, as soon as the ground was dry, was going to make a mess of things, just look to the end of chapter 9. Here, with Noah and his family, and through them, all humanity, God says, I will establish my covenant. And if you know about covenants, then you will know that a covenant is not a sort of if I do this, or if you do that, I'll do this sort of agreement. It's not dependent on the other person's response in any way. God's promise now is, I will do this for you. However you choose to respond, however much the heart of humanity leans away from God, however much we choose to ignore God or turn our back on him, God's covenant now with Noah and his family, with you and with me, is now unconditional. God's promise is, I will love you always, so much so that I will never seek to destroy you. God's heart is changed. His love is offered with no strings attached. The heart of humanity after the fall remains unchanged. We still have that natural tendency to lean away from God and toward ourselves. I said a moment ago, we only need to look at the world around us to see evidence of that. But God's promise given to Noah and through all the generations to us is that he will never turn his back again on us. And then the rainbow appears, a reminder, a sign to both confirm and to affirm the promise. Not so much for us, but maybe for God himself. For God said, every time I see the rainbow, I will remember. And so today, for us, the rainbow becomes that reminder that we are not forgotten. It becomes that reminder that we are loved, accepted, included, reconciled. And as we allow, or as we find ourselves drawn to God, so we find this to be true. So often as we begin our journey through Lent, we can find or feel metaphorically that Lent is that long walk with our heads down. We carry the weight of our frailty and our failings. But today, we're reminded, as we were on Ash Wednesday, that as we journey, so we are to look up, to see the rainbow, as it were, to see the cross. For our Lenten journey is, yes, a reflection upon our frailty. But it also, as we journey, there becomes the growing realization of the promise, which then finds its fulfillment, its completion on Easter Sunday in the cross. For here, in the cross, we encounter God's unconditional love. Here in the cross, we're reminded of God's promise of hope, of reconciliation, inclusion, acceptance, and peace. We start our Lenten journey with the symbol of the rainbow, and we'll finish our Lenten journey with the symbol of the cross. Amen.